In the room, so people start. Okay, the time is now 5:31 on Wednesday, April 26, 2023, and this public meeting of this DC State Board of Education will come to order. The roll will now be called to determine the presence of a quorum. Director Butler, please call the roll.
Lee Bernstadt,
Present.
Taylor Washington,
Present.
Ben Williams,
Present.
Alistair Chang, Eric Goulet, Fraser O'Leary,
Present.
Robert Henderson,
Present.
Brandon Best, Ebony Rose Thompson,
Present.
Carlene Reed,
Present.
Jacques Patterson. Madam President, you have a quorum.
A quorum has been determined, and the State Board will now proceed with the business portion of the meeting. Members, we have a draft agenda before us. Are there any corrections or additions to the agenda? Okay, seeing no changes, I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. It has been properly moved and seconded. I will ask for the yeas and the nays. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Sorry. We now have the minutes of our March 29th working session. Is there a motion to adopt the minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second? All right. It has been properly moved and seconded. Is there a discussion? All right. Seeing no discussion, the motion is on the adoption of the March 29th working session minutes. I will ask again for the yeas and the nays. All in favor, please say, all in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right. Motion is approved. Good evening. My name is Ebony Rose Thompson. I represent Ward 7 on the State Board of Education. I have the pleasure of serving as the president this year. On behalf of the DC State Board of Education members, I want to welcome our guests and the viewing public to our public meeting. The State Board plans to continue to hold this in-person posture for our public meetings. The State Board holds its regularly scheduled public meetings on the third Wednesday of every month, not this month, at the Old Council Chambers at 441 4th Street Northwest. This meeting is being broadcast live via the District Knowledge Network and live streaming via the State Board's YouTube page at DC SBOE. Before I get into a discussion of the items on this evening's agenda, I want to take some time to share a few updates and highlights from the past month. Since we last met, the State Board has held 3 social studies community information sessions. The board's newest committees met for the first time to begin planning their work, and the agency shared its FY 2024 budget testimony before the Council's Committee of the Whole. Lastly, SBOE leadership met with Chairman Mendelson, Deputy Mayor Kine, and Superintendent Grant to continue to foster transformative partnerships for DC students and families. This evening, the State Board will hear from 17 public witnesses. We look forward to hearing from you all as you share testimony on the draft social studies standards, seizure-safe schools, education governance, school-based mental health, out-of-school time programs, and other important educational topics. Please continue to sign up every month to share public testimony. Our next public meeting of the State Board, we will be back on our regular schedule for May 17th. First on our agenda, which is a little bit different than normal, is our expert panel. The panel consists of 4 invited witnesses who will share their thoughts on the revised draft social studies standards updated in March by the Office of the State Superintendent for Education. Panelists will highlight strong points of the revised standards, areas where they see the standards can be improved, challenges that may arise for educators teaching the new standards, and how students in each grade band will be affected by the changes. The State Board will transmit this feedback to OSSE as it continues to review and refine the standards. We are excited to hear from Dr. Jessica Sutter, Youth Civic Development Institute for Citizens and Scholars and former SBOE President, Cosby Hunt, Manager of Youth Programs and World History Teacher at the Center for Expired Teaching, Sarah Busher, am I saying that correctly? Sarah Busher, 4th grade teacher, Janney Elementary School, and Brian Rosser, TLI History Teacher, Sousa Middle School. Please come to the table now. I am seeing some movement, so each of you will have up to 5 minutes, and then we will move to our one round of questions from the State Board. We will begin with Dr. Sutter. Welcome back, Dr. Sutter. You can start when you are ready.
All right, thank you. President Thompson, Vice President O'Leary, and esteemed members of the State Board, I'm honored to be here with you all tonight to share some reactions to the draft social studies standards, as well as some suggestions on how the board might proceed on your essential work of state standards of learning. I'm pleased to share my praise for so many aspects of the revised standards. As you all know, I spent my term on the State Board focused on the work of this necessary standards revision. I served as chair of the SISAC, the Social Studies Standards Advisory Committee, and facilitated a series of meetings during which that group generated the 19 guiding principles which were subsequently adopted by the State Board. The revised standards do a great job of aligning with the guiding principles, and especially in telling a more inclusive set of stories of diverse people and groups throughout history, weaving DC history in throughout K-12 classes, and pushing students towards deeper understanding and application of knowledge across the disciplines within the field of the social studies. I also appreciate the statements of practice and the rigorous explanations of the inquiry arc, which flow throughout the full breadth of the K-12 standards. The grade level headnotes and the inclusion of driving concepts across all grade levels are also helpful, because even with fewer, clearer standards, there is still an enormous amount we're asking educators to cover, and these statements can help guide the creation of standards-aligned curriculum so that all students complete each grade having received rigorous instruction which meets the key goals of each course. Finally, while I'm testifying today as an individual and not on behalf of my employer, as someone who works in civic learning, I must also applaud the revised standards' deep focus on civics, including foundations of U.S. government, concepts of laws and policies, and the preparation of students for engaging in civil discourse and taking informed action. The decision to dedicate 8th grade to a year-long civics course shows a deep commitment to the role of our DC schools in preparing our students for their lives as citizens, and the need to ensure that students are both well-informed and prepared to be productively engaged in our democracy. As I noted in earlier written testimony to this board, no standards document is perfect. Neither is this one. The key thing I think State Board can do with this version of the standards is to approve it. Our existing standards will turn 17 this year. So will many of our juniors and seniors in high school. Our students deserve to have standards that are updated and serve them well in the modern day. I urge you in the strongest possible terms to approve the standards that are brought to you by OSSE. And then, please ensure it never again takes this long to revise our social studies standards or any of our standards of learning in DC. Create a policy that ensures standards will be reviewed, revised, and reapproved on a regular cadence, and that cadence is at least once a decade. Build a continuing role for the State Board to ensure that our students are always presented with relevant knowledge and skills which prepare them for the world into which they will enter as they leave high school. My key concerns regarding these standards are threefold: curriculum, student-facing materials, and time. The State Board can work with OSSE and educators in a straightforward, if not simple way, to mitigate the first two concerns. Our standards are anything but standard, and when compared to other states, we will not simply be able to purchase curriculum or textbooks which will align with our revised standards. Nor must we expect that each teacher, school, or even each of our 67 LEAs should be expected to craft their own curriculum and source their own materials to teach the new standards. I urge the State Board to work with OSSE, with educators from across LEAs, with advocates, and with nonprofit content providers to create an open source, voluntary state curriculum aligned with the new state social studies standards. Partnering with teachers and both local and national nonprofit content providers can yield a powerful curriculum for DC students with high-quality student-facing materials. This effort will take time and will cost the state money, but the upfront investment will be worth far more than the budget outlay. It will harness and develop professional competency of our educators and ensure greater consistency and continuity of curricular content across the city than would be possible with a piecemeal approach. Finally, the question of time. It's far more troublesome. These thoughtfully revised new standards will be worth nothing at all if adequate time is not dedicated in each and every school, in each and every grade for social studies. We must all, citizens, educators, and state board members alike, advocate for time to be allocated to and protected for social studies instruction. Our society is less well when our children lack time to learn about the world around them and the world beyond them. When our children have windows and mirrors, they can truly see brilliant futures for themselves. We owe them at least that much. Thank you.
Can I use her time? Please. My name is Sarah Busher, and I'm the upper elementary social studies teacher at Janney Elementary School. In addition, I have served on the Social Studies Standards Advisory Committee, spearheaded by Dr. Sutter, and the Technical Writing Committee assembled by OSSE to draft a new set of social studies standards. When I mention the Technical Writing Committee, or TWC, I want to be clear that we did not write this current set of standards. This current draft, it was actually passed off to a team of consultant writers, and we instead, once the school year started, began acting in more of an advisory capacity. We are at an exciting time in social studies instruction. My colleagues and I are inspired by the Fordham Institute's 2020 findings that social studies instruction strengthens reading comprehension more effectively than increased time spent teaching reading skills. This is why drafting a new set of standards is so urgent and timely. I appreciate that this draft includes inquiry arc standards. The use of inquiry in social studies is widely considered to be best practice, delivering opportunities for students to engage with rigorous content and develop critical thinking skills while analyzing multiple perspectives. In addition, one of the inquiry standards is around identity. This is a crucial step forward for social studies instruction. Through the identity strand, we hoped to allow students to see themselves reflected, consider multiple perspectives, and identify with and feel compassion for others. These standards help toward this end. I'm excited to see environmental literacy and action civics incorporated into the standards, which the SSAC and the TWC all felt was critically important. If there's one thing I could change about the elementary standards, hold on to your hats, it's a big change, it would be to shift when DC history and US history 1 and 2 are taught in grades 3 through 5. In my ideal world, US History 1, which spans the history of the Americas up to the framing of the US Constitution, would be taught in 3rd grade instead of 4th grade. 4th grade would then teach US History 2, and 5th grade would teach DC history. This shift would disrupt the expanding horizons model that has characterized most social studies instruction for decades. Increasingly, this model is criticized for not being rigorous enough because students can grapple with more challenging and powerful content at younger ages than this model allows. The TWC was committed to delivering standards that no longer reflected this model. This shift would also allow the 3rd grade to build on the study of ancient civilizations outlined in the 2nd grade standards. As it is, the 2nd grade study of ancient civilizations seems to exist in a vacuum, and we run the risk of losing some of the powerful learning about human diversity and adaptation that can be gained at this grade by not building on it in 3rd grade. In addition, by allowing students to explore colonialism and some of its impacts on the Americas in 3rd grade, we can begin to disrupt the racialization of students that has been documented by researchers as becoming entrenched in the upper elementary years. By exploring how racist ideas evolved alongside European invasion and settler colonialism, we can challenge some of the biases and stereotypes children are exposed to in our society and begin to internalize. Allowing students to explore this history provides them with the context necessary to accurately interpret the world around them. Additional reasons the elementary team of the TWC were excited about this switch was because it provides more context for students to understand the history of Washington, D.C. How can they understand negotiations about where the nation's capital should be located if they don't understand how slavery factored into those deliberations? Failing to appreciate this fact makes it harder for students to appreciate how slavery served as the economic engine that allowed the 13 colonies to grow as quickly and successfully as they did. Failing to understand this means that our children are not fully equipped to understand slavery as the cause of the Civil War or to interrogate our current culture wars. One third grade standard states analyze the history and legacy of major monuments and historical sites in and around Washington, D.C. Yet how can students truly grasp the legacy of the Jefferson Memorial if they haven't grappled with the reality of Jefferson the enslaver? Finally, by moving DC history to 5th grade, teachers are better positioned to build out an actionable action civics curriculum. I would argue that this is better suited to 5th grade than 3rd grade. Students can write, speak, and agitate more persuasively about why a certain monument should be placed on our national mall or why DC should become a state when they know our country's history and can think about it more abstractly. Regrettably, when this idea was brought forward to OSSE, we were told it was too late to make these changes, and it was too much of an ask of teachers to adapt to these new standards. Before the standards are adopted and taught in DC classrooms, I'm out of time. We need more time. I think that's an apt metaphor.
You can have a little.
Oh, thanks. Okay. I need you to understand that teachers in the younger grades are struggling to find the time to teach social studies with the increased asks to apply assessments. In addition, I think that many in social studies education fail to appreciate that most elementary educators are generalists, not content experts. There are times when we don't know what we don't know. So in order to implement these standards, it's critical that OSSE and DCPS work together productively to develop factually accurate, differentiated curriculum materials that address our whole history, including the hard parts, while also providing students the guidance necessary to avoid curriculum violence. I can't speak highly enough about the people I've worked with. I'm truly out of time. I'm grateful for your time. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you to the Board of Education for inviting me to be part of the conversation about the revised social studies standards. My name is Cosby Hunt. Despite what the information tells you on the agenda, I teach at Roosevelt High School. I teach 11th grade U.S. history, and I am also the manager of youth programs at Center for Inspired Teaching. I don't teach world history. It's too hard. How do they do it? I was a writer of 17 years, oh God. I was a writer of the standards back in the early 2000s and this most recent go-round, so I have a lot to say on the topic. Just kidding. I'll keep my remarks fairly brief. With regard to what the standards got right, I would say that we met the goal of fewer, clearer standards. The average standard is less wordy than its predecessors. These standards recognize indigenous peoples, our Latinx population, and queer culture in a way that they did not before. I'd like to focus my remarks on the very last standard of 3 of our high school courses. So like Sarah, I hope it's okay if I'm going to get into the weeds a little bit. You'll see that these courses and those standards have something exciting in common. All right, let's look at 9th grade World History 1. This is the very last standard. Using evidence, construct a claim about a compelling question regarding a UNESCO World Heritage Site or the ownership of artifacts from antiquity. Okay? I'll just highlight that phrase, construct a claim. All right, here's the last standard from U.S. Government and Civics. Now we're in 12th grade. Analyze the origins of a public policy issue and present a proposal defending a position or invoking a call to action at the local, state, or national level. So here I want to highlight the phrase, present a proposal. And finally, as a native Washingtonian, I love it, that our DC history course, the very last standard says, evaluate the current challenges and opportunities facing Washingtonians and propose a solution for district residents. So there I want to highlight propose a solution. So as you can see, these 3 courses end with students using their skills to take action. They conduct research, they gather evidence, they make proposals, and they offer solutions to challenges we face in our contemporary world. In fact, the introduction to both 12th grade courses makes a reference to end-of-course capstone projects. I hope that we can live up to that ideal of a capstone project. This social studies in action approach is exciting, and it builds upon the new action civics course proposed for 8th graders that's been mentioned before. This approach will come with its own challenges, however. In particular, as my colleagues have said, the time needed for students to create meaningful projects being foremost among them. I suspect there will be many teachers who will say, oh, the very last standard? We never even got there before the year ended. In my own school at Roosevelt, we teach on the block schedule. Classes meet for 82 minutes. In that format, each 12th grade social studies course meets every other day and for only a semester. That means that U.S. government meets Mondays and Wednesdays, DC history Tuesdays and Thursdays. Fridays alternate between the 2 courses. In other words, each course is really only 9 weeks of class time. This is not a criticism of the block system nor my school. It's just an acknowledgement of the reality that Father Time will be the major impediment to these exciting capstone projects. If teachers can find a way to facilitate meaningful projects with students, I believe we also have an opportunity to help students with the high school community service requirement. A 9th grade world history student who follows that course's last standard will be constructing a claim about a compelling question regarding UNESCO World Heritage Site. She might extend those efforts to identifying and supporting a local historic site like Mount Zion Cemetery or President Lincoln's Cottage. Likewise, a 12th grade DC history student evaluating a current challenge to the city and proposing a solution might actually try to implement that solution, as we have seen students at Thurgood Marshall Academy do in response to gun violence, with the formation of the Pathways to Power program. In both cases, the student would be providing a service to the community. As we consider the adoption of these standards, I hope we can create professional development which will help students and teachers make the most out of the potential embedded in them. Thank you for your time.
So I understand our last speaker is parking. What I am going to do is, nope, that's not our last speaker. No. Okay. So what I'm going to do is we will start the round of questions, and then we'll do the final testimony and do a shorter round after to keep us moving. So Director Butler.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to start with our student representatives. Representative Bernstadt.
Hi, thank you all so much for your time. I think I have 1 or 2 just brief questions. Dr. Sutter, you mentioned obviously creating an open source voluntary state curriculum. Are there other states that currently do this, and do you think this needs to be a commitment OSSE makes before the standards are approved and rolled out, or do you think this is a thing that we can approve them and they can start the rollout of these standards and then curriculum happens later? Because I'm just thinking about timing.
Thanks, Representative Bernstadt. Maryland uses a voluntary state curriculum and used, again, teachers from around the state to write the curriculum as units together. I do think OSSE would have to commit to it ahead of time in order for this to be something folks could plan on. I know that even while I was serving on the board, DCPS was already talking about preparations to update the curriculum to align with the new standards, so it would have to be something OSSE commits to early on in the process before these standards are fully rolled out.
Okay. I actually think that's my only question. Thank you so much. And I know my time wasn't running, but I definitely didn't use all of it. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Representative Bernstadt. Excuse me. Representative Washington.
Hi. I actually don't have any questions, but I did want to say thank you all for your time and your incredibly thoughtful testimonies. So yeah, I yield the remainder of my time. Thank you.
Representative Henderson.
Hi, thank you all. You all were talking about time, and excuse me, one of the concerns that we've heard from people, and I have myself, is just how some of the sequencing and amount of time devoted to particular subjects has shifted, especially with the addition of the action civics in 8th grade. Do you have any concerns, or what would you say to those people who do have concerns about how the sequence of courses has shifted? For example, putting U.S. History 1 in 7th grade. How do you feel about those changes?
I was a guest at an American University graduate class the other night, and we were talking about the 8th grade Action Civics course as it's proposed. And one of the students in the class asked me if it was too early, were they too young, are they too young to do Action Civics in 8th grade? And my general attitude about 8th graders is that they should either be chopping wood or doing stuff like this. Like, we have to take the energy that they have in middle school and put it to use for the good of our communities, or they should be chopping wood. So I love it. I love it. As for moving U.S. History 1 to 7th grade, I haven't thought too much about it. I just love the fact that before they leave middle school, they're doing something real, and they're going to take that into their high school experience.
Build on that. So I taught 8th grade social studies here in DC, and I would concur that the more our 8th graders are asked to do, the better they are at their learning. And I think the Action Civics in the 8th grade is going to be very powerful for middle school students. I think shifting 7th grade to U.S. history before that also builds an understanding of why our government is set up the way that it is. I mean, they'll have had government in elementary school, but a recent check on that, I think, will build that appropriately. I do think, though, that these concerns you're hearing underscore the need for the level of support that our educators are going to look to our state for in preparing for the rollout of these standards. And I think my colleague Sarah mentioned this as well, the need for professional development, especially for elementary educators, but I would argue for middle school educators too, to make sure that they have the content necessary to really roll out these new standards.
Yeah, thank you. I hope that all of our social studies standards are as actionable as possible, every grade. I know that you have looked at the many iterations that these have taken over time. Do you think they're getting better?
I absolutely think the standards are getting better. I think that this current set of standards don't meet the moment in the way that we had hoped originally. We really hoped to kind of blow everything up when we first started. We were cognizant last summer that these standards will be under the scrutiny of Congress. And so we're trying to balance radical revision with what can pass politically. So these move the needle in the right direction. This is an important step forward, and I do want to reiterate what Dr. Sutter says. It's critically important that another decade doesn't elapse until we visit this again. Our children deserve no less.
All right, thanks. I won't try to squeeze in another.
Next, we'll have, Representative Reed.
Yes.
Busher. Certain, again? No. Oh, I apologize. So no, I should have done that. So when I referenced the 3rd grade standard around monuments, I'm sorry, I didn't pull out the number. Yeah.
Sure. So I had written down that I think that writing some sort of a voluntary statewide curriculum that was open source would be better than a piecemeal approach for each LEA or each school writing a curriculum, because we know a lot of students move schools over the course of their careers, and if we had a common curriculum, whether or not every LEA picked it up, the likelihood that students would get things that were consistent across schools would be much greater than we see right now.
Hello, guys. Excuse my tardiness, by the way. Yes, there is a space, but it will be new for eighth grade teachers. New for eighth grade teachers, because U.S. history is moving to seventh grade. The eighth grade teachers having to deal with creating the space for students to become change makers. I would say that does allow for them to actually become more globalized, but it will be new for the teachers, so we would have to figure out a way, like kind of going back to what you said, having one standardized curriculum, so if the kids do move schools, or if they just know in increments, like how do they become that type of individual. Added and prepared teachers. Yep.
As the father of an eighth grader who just got back from Thailand on the Deal Middle School trip, he has a global perspective he has an expanding global perspective that he did not have before. So again, middle school is the time to get them thinking broadly. I remember my own middle school experience being introduced to the phrase, think globally, act locally. And I still remember that phrase to this day, even though I learned it in seventh grade.
Representative Williams.
Yes, thank you all for your testimony. I have a lot of questions, but I'll try and just use my time effectively. Starting with Mr. Hunt, what do you had mentioned that there are a lot of shifts, right, that are better in this group. Do you have any concerns about alignment within any of the grades or across grades, or concerns about the standards generally?
I think there's as an 11th grade U.S. history teacher now, I have to begin every course with a sort of a fast-forwarded review of U.S. history from the colonial period up to the Gilded Age, because our standards right now, 11th grade is a Gilded Age to the present. I hate that part of the year. And the idea is, well, they haven't had U.S. history since 8th grade, so we have to remind them what they learned. So now we're pushing it back to 7th grade, so there'll be even more of a big gap. But I actually don't care. Like, let's just dive into Reconstruction to the present. I don't feel a responsibility to go back and teach about the Declaration of Independence. Now, that's just me. I think we just have to let that go. Like, if they've forgotten stuff, they've forgotten stuff. I think, again, but in 8th grade, they're getting action civics, so they're going to get some of it back. But the concerns about, oh, well, there's even more of a gap between when they took the first half and then they're taking the second half, I think we just have to let it go.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate the shifts and the things you pointed out too around like pathways to power at Thurgood. And My 12th grade students are currently working on Action Civics projects right now, and it's one of my favorite parts of the year. Ms. Busher, you had kind of mentioned, and I was looking at like the Learning for Justice site around like how we can kind of scaffold, equitable standards for teaching about American slavery. Do you think, or do you have particular standards that you would like to kind of see in terms of the enduring understandings that we would want, elementary schoolers to get? And would you be willing to kind of like work with us to be able to support improvements over that in the next couple weeks or month?
Yes, I'd be very happy to support any initiative around that. So specific standards, I feel like I can't quite speak to that as much as I can speak to the fact that if we anchor these discussions or these inquiries around power, kids as young as kindergarten can get that because they're playing power games out at recess in the cafeteria. So if we can anchor these ideas to power and inequitable uses of power, but at the same time within the identity strand, talking about how everyone has power and the forms that power takes. I think that children, very young children, can access that if we're talking about it with those ideas. Again, something we always want to be cognizant around is perpetuating any kind of curriculum violence. But if we keep it anchored to power, how we deny people power, how we empower others, I think we can cover a ton of ground.
Thank you. And I don't have much time left, so sorry to put you on the spot like this, Dr. Sutter. But like, given your experience on the board and your role, in the social studies standards, like, what role do you see the state board being able to play and support the curricular work that OSSE will lead moving forward after the adoption of the standards?
I think you all hear from teachers all the time. They come every month, they tell you things that they don't have other forum to share. So I think continue to invite that and then pass that along to OSSE and make sure that it's coming in the form of the state board has heard the following from educators. You also work with educators all the time, both in your districts and in other ways. And I think gathering that information, sharing it with OSSE, asking teachers, how's it going with the curriculum work, and providing that feedback. I think that feedback loop is a really powerful role for the state board to play and one that will be necessary in that process.
Thank you all for your testimony.
Vice President O'Leary.
Good evening. It's so good to have veteran social studies teachers talking about social studies. It's been much too long because nobody even knew who Barack Obama was the last time the standards were changed. In an ideal world, how would you as educators envision the training for social studies teachers to prepare for the new standards with the many resources that have been mentioned by OSSE, all kinds of things that are going to be incorporated from outside of a textbook? Because right now I don't think there's a textbook that really is going to talk about the standards that we are creating right now. How does that, because I would think that teachers, and I'm just coming from my teacher head, the teachers would be really excited about learning about how to teach these new standards because there's so much information that wasn't in the old ones. How do you envision that?
When you said textbook, my throat closed a little bit. So I think it would be critically important and hugely advantageous if all social studies educators, certainly at the elementary grade or pre-K all the way through, actually had formal training in inquiry design and the inquiry design model of instruction. So that's not textbooks. That's curating a variety of articles, delivering content through a whole bunch of media from like video, poetry, theater, articles, as a way to engage students who bring a whole host of intelligences to the classroom, but also to get them access to the content and to help them grow their own ideas. We're past the days where we're teaching and passing down these monolithic truths. We're asking them, and you touched on this a little bit, Cosby, that we're asking them to grow their own ideas and back it up with evidence. We're asking them to listen to each other. We're talking about cultivating civil discourse. I could go on for an hour. I hope I answered your question.
I will have to agree. I would like to actually just piggyback on what you said. Giving the teachers the ability to actually sit in a space, be in a collaborative space, cohorted, possibly sitting there, going over how a curriculum could actually be implemented in the classroom, and getting peer feedback and seeing how that works. Because again, we don't know if this is actually helpful or if it actually is harmful to the students. So I remember I took a class with Mr. Cosby here, and he gave feedback on something I did, and I'm like, oh, okay, that works. But if we hear from our peers that it works or it didn't work, and we know how to implement it with the inquiry-based model, then we know that the students are getting it. But it is working with the teachers before working with the students, so that the teachers know what they're giving to the students, so that they know that they enjoy history, right? Because social studies is not always enjoyed, but if we are able to give it to them in a space of like enjoyment, I think they'll go home and be like, oh, I can change the world.
Thank you for a question about the ideal world. It's fun to think about. So just off the top, the cell phones are gone in the ideal world. They've just disappeared. So let's start there. And place-based professional development. I want to run a professional development session at Mount Zion Cemetery. And I think if I did that, a bunch of teachers would take their kids there, and they could learn about the female union band mutual aid society that was in place before there was insurance taking care of folks so that they would have the money to bury themselves. And they would learn about the segregation of the cemetery and how folks were being disinterred and taken to a white cemetery because they didn't want to be buried near black folks. There's just a lot there. You know, let's go to President Lincoln's Cottage. Let's go to Woodlawn Cemetery. Let's go down to the canal. There's just so much. Let's have a requirement that you take your kids on a field trip.
Yeah.
I mean, it's never good when you require things of social studies teachers, but you know what I'm saying. Let's make it the expectation that you're taking them out, as opposed to something that is sort of going above and beyond. Let's make it the expectation that we're doing place-based education.
Thank you, sir.
Great. Thank you so much.
President Thompson.
First, thanks to the panel, not just for what you brought to us tonight, but because so many of you have been involved in getting us to this point. So I do want to acknowledge that. I think I have two questions. So let's share this managed time thing. Mr. Hunt, you mentioned that you helped write the 2006 standards. I'm curious if there are any differences you would highlight in like that process and what we're experiencing now. And Dr. Sutter, I'd be curious to know, like you said, we should approve these now. Don't let time go by. We're scheduled to vote in June, right? So like, what's the balance of like stopping engagement and like supporting our teachers to get it done? So Hunt first or Sutter first, it doesn't matter.
I'll go first, and I'll try and keep it short. Thank you for the question. So I think that voting yes in June, great idea. Engaging between now and then and focusing in on what can be handled in the work of curriculum, I think is a way to go about it, because standards are a statement about what we want our students to know and be able to do by the time they graduate. But curriculum is going to be what guides the work in the classroom. And I think there are things that folks are providing feedback on. I think the point that Dr. Reed raised about the question of could we add global in? Whether or not it ends up in the standards, I'm sure matters to folks. On the other hand, if it ends up in the curriculum, it would get taught to the children. And so I think there's a way to balance the feedback with informing the curricular process that could still allow these standards to be voted on so that you're not sitting with standards that were written in 2006.
You're asking me to go back 17 years, and I will say that one difference between those efforts back in 2006 and now is this time around our mandate for fewer and clearer I think was a game changer. We were too wordy back in the day.
All right. So I do not want Miss, oh, were you going to chime in?
No.
Okay. So I'm actually going to yield my time, and here's why. I do not want you to think we forgot about you, because we did not. There's no way I'm going to let somebody drive over here from Ward 7 and not testify. So here is what is now happening. I did not want to interrupt our flow because members who started asking questions before joining would not get to consider your testimony. So we're going to have you testify now. You get your full 5 minutes. Nothing has changed. However, members, this is a lightning round because there's only one additional. So, I mean, you do what you do, but lightning round, 90-second round per member, 1 round. Okay? So just so people know what's happening. And we'll reset the clock.
All right. So honestly, I actually answered a couple of questions in my mind. Biggest thing, I actually wanted to answer your question, Mr. Williams, when you actually asked the question of alignment. So one of the biggest things for us in middle school is the alignment from 5th grade to 6th grade. The revisions allow for 6th graders to explore different countries and different cultural differences. 7th grade explored the development of the U.S., starting with the indigenous people, up to the effects of Reconstruction. And 8th grade teaches the students how to become civic engaged, or basically change makers. The sequence is seamless and it is beneficial to the students' historical understanding, but there is a loose alignment coming from 5th grade to 6th grade where the curriculum is not vertically aligned in which we thought. I spoke with the administration at my school as well too, and we thought the same thing. 5th grade is aligned with 7th grade loosely, going into modern America. It talks about the development, independence, expansion. 6th grade then goes into world geography, and then 8th grade kind of goes back into like becoming a civic engager or working within the community. It is misaligned amongst the middle school curriculum standards in which we believe, and students may not receive a clear instructional historical sequence of understanding within middle school. It was just a little bit different looking at the curriculum from 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade. I loved 8th grade U.S. history. Now it's going to 7th grade, but I appreciate what 8th grade consists of, becoming, change makers and working within the community. I am not a DC resident, but I have become like a fan of living in DC, I will say, and just trying to push the students to understand like we could do so much in the community, and community-based things matter. If you want to change the world, change your community first. So that's our biggest thing. But teaching the kids about certain things in 6th grade don't really align to 7th and 8th grade, and that's how we saw it of being loosely based. One of the bigger things too for me regarding the standards, it seems to be a lot of standards. I know, and sometimes when we create the curriculum, here it is like 7 of them, whereas in my opinion, I say 3 to 4 key standards that we can actually create a curriculum using, just to push teacher buy-in, honestly, being able to plan with the new resources, engaging with lessons, and adapting to the changes in their classrooms because they've never taught these curriculums before, or they're changing to a different grade level, or just utilizing the standards. One of my key points that I actually wanted to talk about was a question I was already asked, and how will we actually address these standards for being adopted to be taught in the DC classrooms. I do believe there was at one point in time, and I said it to Mr. Hunt here, about it was a Bliss Academy that we actually had within the social studies department, and teachers were able to like engage in the curriculum and create curriculum and standard-based things. So just creating some form of like a cohort or a pilot so that the teachers can actually be allowed to create and implement lessons, receive peer feedback, lesson design, curriculum structure, and implementation. So BLISS stood for Building Literacy in Social Studies, and that was just a cohort that people could be part of, but I feel like it can actually be implemented within each of the departments, if it being elementary, middle school, and high school, and just having it certain like weekends, or that's something that we have to do for professional development for teachers to just like buy into the new standards. I actually like the 8th grade standards, I will say, even though I love the U.S. history standards because I've taught it for so long, it being some form of change maker. I'm sorry. I am big on community building. I am big on making students like into change makers, and I want them to believe that they can actually change the world. I go off of this quote that I know Q-Tip said, he basically says he cannot convert the converted, he's just out here to crusade for more, and I want the students to actually realize they can make a difference in this world. So the 8th grade curriculum, I actually think it's really cool. Thank you.
See, only a social studies panel will reference Q-Tip. I just want to put that out there.
All right, I'm going back to Director Butler for the lightning round.
Thank you. Representative Bernstedt?
Hi, thank you for your testimony. I had a question about the cohort you mentioned. Was it called Bliss? Bliss. I was wondering if you were a part of it, if it was like inter-school, if you could just talk a little bit more about what that looked like, what purpose it like had at the time that it was created, and kind of what it did more regularly. If like it's something we could implement with a lot of these social studies standards.
Yeah. So Bliss, I was for half of a year, for half of the summer, actually. But Bliss was for all teachers to sign up if they wanted to be part of a cohort to work through implementing the curriculum that we had or the standards that we had, creating curriculum, just learning through interaction or engagement with your peers. I did not actually fully go through all of Bliss, but I did have a coworker that was part of it. She was a new teacher in DCPS, and she was able to help create like not standards, but curriculum-based approach to the standards we had. Okay.
Quick housekeeping, make sure you speak into the mic, because even though we can hear you in the room, it's being broadcast, and I want to make sure people outside the room hear you. No worries.
Representative Reed?
No question.
Representative Williams?
Thank you. Ms. Roser, thank you for your passion around student agency. So I really appreciate that. This is a general question, and at the risk of like conflating this with like more testing, I'm just kind of curious, and maybe Mr. Hunt, if you want to take the lead with this, like how do we balance kind of the autonomy that we give teachers, you know, in DCPS and in charter schools, right, with like some level of like accountability or an assessment that, you know, I'm definitely a fan of like, performance assessments and other times of real world learning assessments, but like making sure that, you know, students are really getting the social studies curriculum. Maybe it wouldn't have to be mandated, but just optional or a resource that we provide, but making sure that, you know, kids really feel a robust and deep understanding of social studies when they leave our classrooms. So I'm curious if you or anyone else wanted to kind of talk about what you think the role of assessment is in this work right now.
I share your interest, your passion in authentic performance assessment. I'm a huge National History Day guy, so I think when you let students, when you have a structure of learning and skills, and you let the students choose what they want to study, a lot of great things happen. And right now I'm trying to sneak NHD into my classroom every Thursday because I've got the mandated curriculum that I have to teach otherwise.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt. Representative Washington.
Good evening again. I wanted to say thank you for your time. I had one question. Do you have any specific ideas for a change within grades 6 and 7? Because I know you talked about like the importance of having that civic engagement course in grade 8 and that misalignment between grades 6 through 8. So I was wondering if you could just talk more about like the role that the board can play in ensuring that that flow is continued across grade levels.
Thank you for your question. I will say the curriculum, if it is going to stay as it is when it comes into 6th grade, just having, if it's more or less on the continents and the culture perspective of it, then saying the comparison, I guess compare and contrast would be the biggest thing of it being, well, how does that compare to our civilization today, kind of getting the kids in that mindset of understanding the U.S. was also developed in this manner. There were indigenous people that lived here as well too. So just kind of comparing back to where we live today and how we live, or what would have been happening at the same time in America as it happened here in this continent or this culture.
Representative Henderson.
I think I can probably predict what some of the answers to this will be, but right now, what are the primary barriers to doing the kinds of field trips that Mr. Hunt was talking about?
Time dedicated to assessments.
For us, it is money getting transportation.
I'll add in that on top of the time for assessments, it's time for field trips. So where would they fit in? What else are they missing in the school day? How many different adults have to be involved in it? And the coordination time for the adults to plan out the field trips. My advisor in graduate school was a volunteer docent at the art museums at the Smithsonian, and he noted they had many, many, many more students from Virginia and Maryland than they ever saw from DC schools. And that has stuck with me and makes me incredibly sad every time I think about it.
Vice President O'Leary.
My question has to do with scaffolding, which I never really worked with. But to me, this is a chance for a revolution in social studies education in the District of Columbia. And so all I can see is your students going to your students, going to your student, going to the different teachers with the knowledge that they gained about social studies in the lower grades to the middle grades to the higher grades, which takes an enormous amount of collaboration with teachers. So that I don't think that we can isolate the grades as far as learning what's going to happen with this scaffolding of history or social studies education. Does that make any sense? Could you speak to that?
So it sounds to me like you're talking about vertical alignment, and I would agree that there's not enough time, certainly in my own elementary school, for us to explore vertical alignment from pre-K to 5, much less vertical alignment from pre-K to 12. So your question is spot on. So the question is, where are those opportunities for us to create vertical alignment, especially as we think about PD, as we think about implementing this curriculum and capitalizing on opportunities that could exist across the grades? It's a great question.
Thank you. President Thompson.
I actually want to go back to something that you said, not in your testimony, but in your answers of the questions. You said, if we give students social studies in a space of enjoyment, they'll go home and think they can change the world. My question to the panel is, if you feel like good enough, yes, these standards do that. Like this version of the standards, do they do that? Do they foster the enjoyment to all of you? And it can be a yes or a no, or if you want to give me some color.
Thanks for bringing forward enjoyment, because I think as we're still recovering from the pandemic and the shutdown, and I think a critical thing that we're not talking about is joy in the classrooms, right? And so I think Action Civics brings joy into the classrooms. Anytime that we can allow for student choice brings joy and engagement into the classrooms. I'm so excited by what you said that I actually lost your question. So I'll let someone speak.
So very quickly, I do feel that Action Civics brings enjoyment. And if, going back to a question I was asked, if being able to have a field trip once a month with the work, with the enjoyment of the students liking what we're doing, I think it allows for them to say, this is amazing. But due to money, due to certain constraints and where we're located, it doesn't allow for us to actually move and groove like we want to. But I feel like going on field trips is the enjoyment part. Honestly.
Thank you all.
I want to again thank our panel. I want to give you a chance. Sorry. Oh, you're about to get to thank everybody. So I want to again thank our panel, and then actually I'm going to transition us to Superintendent Grant, who got to hear the panel for probably the first time at a SBOE meeting. So I hope she
I'm
enjoyed
always
it as well.
watching, but-
Yeah. Well, in person.
In
though.
person,
Yeah.
I mean, I do want to acknowledge you all, so I'll jump around in my remarks. First, it was great to start and end the day with State Board leadership. We started our morning, it is Read Across DC Day, and so we started our morning together, me and President Thompson at the National Children's Center, reading to some very enthusiastic pre-K4 students, and then Dr. O'Leary had a great time at a friendship school. I think Vice President O'Leary won in terms of student engagement and outright happiness of children. And so thank you both for joining us in our joy of literacy across the district. It's enjoyable to see like our investments in that when you ask a child what their favorite book is, they have a range of books. And when we finished reading, they were like, okay, read again, like give us another book. And so just truly thank you. And thank you all for your flexibility with my schedule this evening. I do want to give you updates on statewide assessments, our accountability plan, social studies, transportation, and environmental literacy. But first, really did want to say thank you. It is a full moment to sit here before you all today discussing real standards that you stated so eloquently move the needle forward, but also critically inform us on the work we have to do ahead. When I joined the district in 2021, one of the most compelling statements was like, and we are in the middle of a social studies revision. And I was like, now? Like right now, like at this moment in history. And so many other commissioners of education have held my hand and given me lots of cautionary tales on how we walk this line, but we would not have been able to do this work without educators like you. And it should go without acknowledging that Dr. Sutter led this board through the process of setting the guidelines. And so the call to task to have less standards that go deeper, the call to task to have an action civics course, and all of the fun that means shifting middle school social studies. You led this work, you handed it off, and it is my great joy. I made a very courageous promise to you that I would see this through, and I do hope that we will find ourselves at this table in June, making history in a really authentic way for our children. Most people don't know that I was a social studies teacher, and it is mind-boggling that the last time these standards were changed, I was a teacher of social studies. And so it was both professionally fulfilling and intellectually engaging to engage in this conversation. Like as you all are criticizing the standards, I'm like, yep, that is there and we need to fix that. And as I was hearing about implementation, which is also of most import to me, the road ahead does involve a lot of time with our teachers and our educators mapping out the course of what does it mean to ensure that these standards are living in the lives of children and not living on shelves. And the critical conversations around assessments that don't necessarily involve tests, but do involve authentic ways for us to know that we are creating the citizens that we want leading, changing, transforming Washington, D.C. And so a true heartfelt thank you for being here this evening, but for also being along the journey with us. It is emotional work for me. Many of you know we are currently in the midst of administering our statewide assessments. We are administering our assessments in ELA, math, and science. They are all ongoing now and through the end of May. Alternative assessments in ELA, math, and science, our MSAA and our DLM, are wrapping up this week, and our English language proficiency assessment access was completed earlier this spring. A tremendous Herculean thank you to our entire education ecosystem. This is our second year of administering our assessments since the pandemic, and it's been exciting to see all of us engage in ways for our students to show what they know. After a 2-year hiatus, our last year's assessment scores showed that the shift to remote learning, as well as the societal and psychological impacts of the pandemic, had profoundly negative impacts on student learning and mastery. OSSE is investing $62 million in recovery funding to accelerate our learning by expanding access to tutoring, scaling our investments in high-quality instructional materials, expanding access to literacy training grounded in the science of reading, and we are quite proud of that, building our educator math content knowledge, and expanding learning time and more. LEAs are also investing millions of recovery funding to boost student learning. And while we know it's going to take multiple years to recover from the effects of the pandemic, I am optimistic that our statewide assessments are going to show that we're making progress and that our investments are paying off. I would also like to share, and this will mean a lot to former President Sutter as well, that the United States Department of Education has communicated that they do not have any further feedback on our amended ESSER State Accountability Plan at this time. I want to note that that plan was approved by our former board in July of 2022. And so do just want to name for everyone the journey of what it takes to revise a plan and go through the approval process. I saw the Secretary of Education this afternoon and I was like, are we truly pencils down? Because goodness, we're ready to get rocking and rolling on our DC report card. I'm optimistic that our plan is going to be approved by June, and this will allow for DC report card engagement and redesign to commence in July, which I'm very excited about. The panel this evening was a wonderful culmination to what has been just an exciting public engagement process. We released our draft standards for your last social studies panel in December. We have heard positive affirmations for our inclusion of standards that centered historically marginalized perspectives. We held an extended public comment from December through February, which over 180 responders provided more than 5,000 total comments that were both supportive and constructive and helped inform our revision process. And I do hope that individuals can see the shift from where we were even in December to where we are today, and even some of the things that were raised tonight. Folks were text messaging me and they're like, yep, we got it. Yep, we got it. And so we know that even as we get ready to put forth standards next month for consideration, we will continue to make revisions. We had an exceptionally insightful and comprehensive set of standards from the state board at the end of February on the initial draft standards. Your comments, and I'm looking this way because we have a lot of social studies expertise on our state board, which I am fortunate for. They were instrumental in developing the second revision of the standards, which we released on March 29th. The feedback really strengthened our second draft, and the supportive comments really helped shape where we are today. And those comments came from current social studies teachers, former social studies teachers, leaders who care deeply about teacher voice, engagement, organizations, and college professors. It's been thrilling to see the way that our community has wrapped their hearts and minds around this revision process. Since the release of our second draft, we have received additional feedback from individual state board members, and we ask that they keep coming. And then we've attended the 3 social studies public engagement sessions held by the board in April, most recently on Monday evening. And I do want to thank you all for going on that journey and authentically having your public engagement. It really does show a way that we can work together to ensure that we've covered all of our respective constituencies as they are, as we really do want to move forward and put standards forth for adoption. I'm appreciative of our board members and the members of our public, particularly our teachers who took the time to continue to go through the standards and then go through them again and then go through them again. We continue to value the voice of our educators and our families as we move closer to final adoption. I look forward to the board's summary of the comments that you've received at your engagement sessions, as well as comments that I was actively taking tonight from our expert panelists. I know, and I think we know, that historically accurate, academically challenging, and culturally relevant social studies standards enhance student engagement in ways that you have shared, and academic knowledge. It prepares our students for a life of active citizenship. And I do just want to name, this is like off script, I heard the robust conversation about the role that field trips play in bringing our standards alive. I was a teacher in New York, and we would dream of being able to bring our kids to DC because it is such a unique place in terms of history, learning, future. And so that is work that I will be committing to thinking about the role that we play in making sure that all children get access to the many opportunities for learning. I mean, you could go stand outside this building and be like, Marion Barry, let's talk. And so, I think that there's work that we can do there. So I want to make that commitment really quickly, but not quickly. Moving on to student transportation, a topic that I touch base on every month since the beginning of the year. We continue to make strides on our routes, and we know that we can't lose time on instruction. And so we focus on trying to get our students where they need to be and on time. We also know that we are continuing to work on improved communication with our families. In February, we instituted a pilot program where we were personally text messaging 200 families on routes regarding the pickup time for their students. I'm excited to share that this phase was tremendously successful, and as a result, we've expanded the program to an additional 800 families. That means we are training our attendants and drivers in real time to text and say we're 5 minutes out, we're 10 minutes out. The dynamics of DC are very tricky, and a lot of our students are transported through Maryland and many students into Virginia, and so this is helping us improve our communication with families, and should the numbers continue to go well, we will continue to expand the program. Last but not least, we hosted our kickoff meeting for the Environmental Literacy Advisory Committee to update the district's environmental literacy plan on April 13th. We were glad that state board staff were able to make it to the kickoff, and we look forward to a state board member permanently joining the advisory committee. From preventing literacy to halting greenhouse gas emissions, we know that building environmental literacy, agency, and passion is vital for protecting and preserving our community and our planet. This district's environmental literacy plan addresses content standards, educator professional development, implementation, funding, evaluation, and graduation requirements. This is cross-cutting work that we are pleased to lead, and I know we will benefit immensely from the state board for their member input. As I close my remarks, if I have not said it enough, I do want to, again, say thank you for the lively social studies standards panel discussion this evening. And I do want to acknowledge Dr. Jessica Sutter, our former state board president, once again for your tremendous commitment to this work. You truly led the kickoff for this entire revision process. And I know that you might feel a way of not sitting on this side of the stage, but where you're sitting now is even more important as we move from standards adoption to implementation. And so in a lot of ways, all things work together that you are on this side of the table, because we needed you in one phase of your career to get to where we are in your current phase of your career. And so I truly do hope that you will hold my hand and Asi's hand as we move toward implementation, because we have to get that right as well. I'd like to close by lifting up our district educators who make everything possible. I was late because I was with our DC Teacher of the Year winner, Jamar Roundtree, who was one of our 5 finalists for National Teacher of the Year. While we were disappointed to know that we were not chosen as our national winner, I met the national winner today. She is quite lovely. We are nonetheless really proud of Coach Roundtree as our district teacher and our role model. He is actually an exceptional person. We are especially proud because we know that Black men are sorely underrepresented in the teaching ranks, both locally and nationally. We appreciate everything that Coach Roundtree has done as DC's Teacher of the Year and every single thing he does every single day for our children. He literally brightens my day and everyone else's when I have the opportunity to speak with him, and I know he does the same for his children. Teacher Appreciation Week is coming up soon. It's the second week in May, so please remember to thank our teachers for everything they do to build the next generation of district leaders and civic leaders. And I look forward to seeing all of you. I'm making eye contact with all the board members, even the ones down there, at our Educator Awards next week, May 3rd, from 5:30 to 7:30 at Gallaudet University. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Grant, for your remarks. I want to thank the panel again, and I'm going to do a mix of things. So one, housekeeping for the public. Yes, Dr. Grant noted, and I believe I noted in my remarks, that we did do 3 engagements around social studies. That does not mean you cannot still tell us what you think. Email your member, email OSSI, go to their website. You can also go to SBOE@dc.gov and continue to send us feedback. We will hear feedback tonight, and of course, we will pass that on. And I'm sure some of the things from this panel probably even sparked further discussion and feedback. So thank you. Second, housekeeping. We will go on break for for 5 minutes. Now, I want to be really clear with what I mean by 5 minutes. So by my clock, it is 6:46. We should be back ready to go 6:51 so we can get to public comment because we want to hear more feedback and get home at a reasonable hour. So I am going to take us to recess. Thank you to the panel. Thank you for everyone for your patience, and we will see you back in 5 minutes. All right, that timer means we are reconvening. So I'm going to ask members to move toward the dais if they are not at the dais or seated already. Hey, Sally. All right. We hear testimony from public witnesses at every public meeting, and your comments become part of our official record. If you would like to speak at a future public meeting, please sign up on our website at sboe.dc.gov or contact our staff by email at sboe@dc.gov or by phone at 202-741-0888. Tonight, we have 17 individuals who have submitted public testimony. We will hear from those in attendance. Each witness will have up to 3 minutes to provide comments. Please note that you must use the microphone at the table, which is already on. The timer light on the table will be green for the first 2.5 minutes, yellow for the last 30 seconds, and red after 3 minutes have elapsed. After our public witnesses speak, we will pause for questions from board members. Members will have 3 minutes for questions for our public witnesses, and those three minutes include both the question or comments and the witness's answer. Ms. Butler will call public witnesses to the table, and she will call the question rounds. She will also assist with timing to ensure our witnesses and board members stay within their allotted time. Ms. Butler, you may ask public witnesses to come to the table.
Thank you, President Thompson. Will Ms. Mia Crawford, Jessica Giles, Dr. Dominique Watson, Derek McNatt, and Dr. Freeman please come to the table? Deneen Phillips, Sally Swartz, Claire Saboda, Taisha Andrews, Tawanda Clemens, Kenise Robertson, Simone Scott, Michael Poulin. Okay. You can get started, Ms. Giles.
All right. Greetings, Executive Director Butler, representatives, student representatives, and DC State Board of Education staff. My name is Jessica Giles. I'm a Ward 7 resident and the Executive Director of Education Reform Now, DC. EARN DC is a nonprofit organization fighting for a just and equitable public education system for all students in Washington, DC. Thank you to OSSI and the SBOE for holding many opportunities for the public to engage in the revision of the social studies standards. In February, EARN DC submitted public comment to OSSI and public testimony to the SBOE, recommending essential changes that are needed to the social studies standards. Several of our recommendations were accepted, so that we are pleased with, and I hope that OSSI and SBOE move swiftly to approve these standards after more considerations given to those to the public. Additionally, I would like the State Board and the State Level and Systemic Policy Committee in particular to focus on 2 additional vital topics this year. The first one is making the expansion of dual enrollment opportunities a top priority. 51% of students enroll in a 2- or 4-year college in the district. However, only 8 out of 100 ninth grade students will complete a post-secondary degree within 6 years of high school graduation.
Dual enrollment has a significant effect on 2- and 4-year college enrollment, degree attainment, and early labor market earnings 6 years after high school, with stronger effects for students who are traditionally underrepresented. There are 2 important issues I would like the committee to pay special attention to with regards to dual enrollment: the need for expanding in-person cohort-based dual enrollment courses in the district. A successful example includes the BARD sequence, which is currently offered at IDEA Public Charter School and Thurgood Marshall, and making sure that students receive high school credit for their college courses. DC is an outlier in this regard, and in high school students not receiving credit for their high school courses, and it is incredibly inefficient. And then secondly, make creating the financial literacy standards a top priority. Currently, DC does not require students to learn personal financial literacy skills, and too few schools offer it. Financial literacy concepts such as earning income, spending, saving, investing, managing credit, and managing risk are all important information that DC students must learn to succeed in school, life, and career. Additionally, students should learn how to become an entrepreneur, better understand career paths and labor market opportunities during the income segment. While OSSE is not revising the social studies standards to include additional financial literacy standards, OSSE should develop and adopt standalone financial literacy standards as soon as possible. We urge OSSE and SBOE to prioritize these 2 issues this year. So thank you for allowing me to testify today.
Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity to testify. I'm Sally Schwartz, Director of Globalized DC. My comments tonight will focus on the global aspects of the Social Studies Standards latest draft. And I guess I would say, after listening to the panel, I would say yes, and. We are looking for social studies standards that follow the board's own guiding principle that calls for an explicit ongoing thread that provides students with global perspective and global context for their own lives. We want DC students, wherever they go to school, to be prepared to operate on a global stage and in cross-cultural settings. We want our students from the earliest age to be global thinkers, to see themselves as part of a bigger world. We want them to care about the world. We want their line of vision and sense of future possibilities to be global. In DC schools now, access to global learning and experience with cultural diversity is not equitably available across the city. Unless we embed this approach in the standards, we know these inequities will persist. With this current draft, we do see progress, but we're not there yet. So I'm going to dwell on the negative. We need to apply a global lens across all social studies subject matter from K to 12. So that students understand the global context, connections, and implications as they study American history, government, digital literacy, civic engagement, and so on. While we definitely see some evidence of this, we need a more intentional, thorough grade-by-grade effort. 2, we really need to embed the widely accepted global competency framework designed to equip students not only with content knowledge, but with skills, mindsets, and experiences that will help prepare them to engage with the wider world. 3, we need to more adequately address the concept of culture, cultural competencies, intercultural communication, and conflict resolution. These standards still present culture as a set of customs, practices, and beliefs that students learn about other people. This is woefully insufficient. None of what I have discussed so far requires a lot of work. It requires going through the standards and sort of applying a global frame. There are problems with some courses. In particular, I still feel 6th grade geography is very weak and has much too much thematic and broad content and nothing explicit or specific. And lastly, I would say, as a global capital with a unique concentration of global expertise and resources, as well as a broad spectrum of careers requiring global and cultural competencies, DC has a particular imperative to adopt strong global K-12
Thank you, Ms.
social
Schwartz.
studies standards. and is well-positioned to
Thank
implement
you,
these
Ms.
standards
Schwartz.
and associated curriculum. Thank you.
Hi all, my name is Claire Sabota. I'm a Ward 2 resident and the Independence and Learning Support teacher at Hardy Middle School, where I teach 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students with intellectual disabilities. This school year, I've had the privilege of witnessing the wonderful support and opportunities that the District of Columbia is working to provide for its entire student body. DCPS's commitment to inclusive practices and narrowing the achievement gap is admirable and an invaluable mission to our students and communities. In the spirit of that commitment, I would like to request that DCPS provides all students enrolled in programs outside of the general education setting with modified diplomas. Giving these students the opportunity to earn a modified diploma will provide our most at-risk population with the same opportunities afforded to our general education students after they leave the DCPS system. Not earning a high school diploma is associated with several negative outcomes according to the report, Trends in High School Dropout and Completion Rates in the United States, 2019, conducted by National Center for Education Statistics. Consequences include limited job opportunities and thus less income, disproportionately higher rates of institutionalization, and worse health outcomes. With the creation of modified diplomas for students in our programs outside of general education, DCPS would not only honor its commitment to inclusion, but also make significant progress towards narrowing the achievement gap. It is important to note that providing students with disabilities with modified diplomas is common practice in other large school districts. For example, Chicago Public Schools awards all students with a diploma upon graduation. Based on their policy, all students receive a standard diploma when they meet standard or IEP modified graduation requirements. For students who meet modified graduation requirements, the school must provide the student with a summary of academic achievement and functional performance, including recommendations on how to assist the student in meeting their post-secondary goals. This is something that DCPS does as well. The only difference is that when our students graduate, they are given a certificate of completion rather than a diploma. I am asking that DCPS change the current IEP certificate of completion to a modified diploma. I currently teach 6 students with intellectual disabilities and have seen firsthand how hardworking, kind, diligent, engaged, and most importantly, capable they are. I feel strongly that we are directly hurting their life outcomes by not honoring their years of effort with a diploma. Please consider changing the trajectory of these students' lives by adding a modified diploma to DCPS's mission. Thank you.
All right, good, excuse me, good evening. Thank you for your time and consideration tonight. My name is Michael Poulin. I am an undergraduate student at American University, and I am here this evening to discuss the digital divide in DC public schools. I've dedicated considerable research to this over the past year, and although I am not a public school student here in DC, this is an incredibly important issue that affects both the future of students here in DC and of the broader community as well. So it can deserve all the attention it can get. Technology and resource disparities are impacting schools across the United States. Students who have insufficient access to technology and broadband are immediately put at a disadvantage. The COVID-19 pandemic with at-home virtual learning highlighted the consequences of the digital divide. There was a glaring disparity in student engagement between students whose economic backgrounds afforded them access to essential digital resources and those whose backgrounds did not. This not only laid bare the economic and education divides that already existed, but studies also show that it worsened this divide in engagement and learning. Now, late last year, I interviewed 2 public school teachers from my home state in New Hampshire. And one thing that really stuck out to me that they observed is that they noticed a limited or missing understanding of many foundational concepts in the courses that they teach, and they also heard similar observations from other teachers in different fields. Students fell behind because they were not as engaged. And we know that students who were least engaged, not by choice, of course, were those who did not have equal access to important digital resources. Now, as our education system grows more dependent on technology, more students will fall behind if they cannot access the appropriate resources. This means more work for our teachers and fewer students receiving the education that they are entitled to. Now, it's no secret that the digital divide is also present here in Washington, D.C. Fortunately, it has received growing attention from government officials and outside organizations. Both the 2021 Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and D.C.'s 2022 Digital Equity Act were important first steps in resolving this problem. However, these acts cannot fix everything. The State Board of Education must remain passionately engaged with the D.C. community through public meetings like these, and also by making targeted efforts to reach the students and families most impacted by the digital divide. It is hard work, but it's essential. Hearing and raising up their voices is crucial to identifying the shortcomings of existing efforts to combat the digital divide and to lift up DC students and families. Thank you.
With that, we're going to go to the first round of member questions. Representative Bernstadt.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for your testimony. I think I have two questions. The first is for Ms. Schwartz. I know you mentioned 6th grade is an area that particularly needs work. Do you think there's other places do you feel that there are other places that we should think about applying a more global perspective to within the standards now specifically that you can point out?
Yeah, well, on the 6th grade is a dedicated course to a global subject. So, you know, I think World History 1 also could use some work, but they're sort of bigger issues, and that is grade by grade, whatever the subject is, we can broaden the lens, and that's what we're really calling for. So, in U.S. history, for example, there are places where if you just look outside the border of the United States, you can see there are things that are influencing us that we just don't see. For example, I think the Haitian Revolution is not mentioned in the U.S. standards, and that's really critical in a lot of our history, the fact that that happened right off. And that's just one example of some international developments that impact us. But also when you do digital literacy, for example, you need to look globally, not just within the United States, because the internet is global, right?
Of course. Okay, thank you so much. I'm so sorry, I'm going to mispronounce your name. Ms. Svoboda? Yeah. Thank you so much for your time and all the work you do. I had a question just because I'm not sure. Can schools now, or do you know if schools now can, at their own discretion, offer modified diplomas, or is it something that can only be done like district-wide?
From my understanding, it would have to be district.
Okay, that was my question. Thank you so much.
Representative Henderson.
Thank you all. Mr. Poland, do you have a paper that you could share with the board? Like, did you produce some? It would be great if you just
yes, I did.
Share that with us.
Of course.
Thank you.
I'd be happy to.
And Ms. Sabata, could you just speak briefly to like what it would mean to a potential employer to have a modified diploma instead of a certificate? Like, what would that mean to them?
Sure. So, as you all know, just any job asks for your high school certificate or high school diploma. So getting your foot in the door for my students, they would almost always need a diploma unless they were working in a position with an aide, which not all of them need that level of support. So a diploma would provide them the opportunity to work independently.
Thank you. And Ms. Schwartz, you talked about what would be required. You said it's not a ton of work. Could you speak to whether, in most cases, it would mean like adding an additional standard, or is it like looking at each standard and assessing its global lens or its global orientation?
Yeah, I'm not sure. You know, it's a difficult public engagement process because the communication is really just one way. We're sort of shouting into the wind, and we don't have an opportunity to get feedback from OSSE, for example, as to what decision-making goes into the product that we see. So it's hard to know whether this is something that has been seriously considered and rejected, or if it's just a matter of people that are not familiar with this way of framing the document. So I would say there needs to be someone who is really steeped in this work, and go grade level by grade level and look at sort of expanding that. So it's not adding a lot of content. It's just beginning to develop a global frame for looking at the world and the subject matter.
And
It would be like a grade by grade review. So it may be adding a standard or two, or it may be revising some language.
And what did you notice between the iteration released in December and the one in March?
I saw an effort to add some. I did see that. In some cases, I thought they were rather arbitrary, dropping in some global standards that didn't really make a lot of sense, and some were good. But I think it wasn't consistent, and so it just seems here and there. And I think we want a global thread that runs through.
Thank you.
Representative Reed.
Thank you all. Do I have a better? Yes, I got a better mic. Okay, Ms. Zavada, say it for me. Oh, Ms. Zavoda. Thank you so much for your advocacy. Representative Chang kind of teed up this conversation a little bit. I'm a special educator. I know you are as well. And I started my career at St. Cloud at Greater Washington. And I'm totally on board working with Representative Chang related to how can we at least explore the topic. But your testimony also had me reflecting and thinking, we were policy-wise, because we were having families at that time possibly making that decision between a certificate of completion or the traditional diploma pretty early, and because of the IEP process. So kind of like, how can we revisit that process to make sure we're not forcing families too soon? Because you just never know the development of a child, regardless of what their educational classification is. So yes, I'm thankful that you came to testify. Looking forward to continuing the conversation on this, because I think it's promising. Mr. Poulin, curious, have you taken your testimony anywhere else?
I have not, no.
I encourage you, because we have a push here on the board to revamp this lovely room that you're sitting on so that we can provide hybrid meeting options, and frequently have to make tough budget decisions between, do we have people or do we have a room that can make as much outreach as possible. So wherever you have opportunity to engage with your council members on up, please do, because we do have a heart to continue our engagement. We try to go hybrid as much as possible. We're out in the community, but as you can see, we have some limitations here. So I totally appreciate your thoughtfulness related to equity and access for our families to these meetings. And I believe if you continue to take that testimony to other powers that be, that it can help us kind of partner and advocate together. So thank you.
Thank you.
That's it.
Thank you. Representative Williams.
Thank you. Thank you all. Ms. Schwartz, I'm curious, with regards to like the global lens, as a board, we're submitting updated feedback to OSSE. It does feel like there's been more and more talk around a June vote. I'm also planning on submitting a list of revisions based on my experience as a social studies teacher. I also taught 6th grade. It was a while ago, but I understand the importance of, that transition to middle school and expanding, students' thinking. Would you be willing to kind of, even though we're not going to get something consistent throughout the document, potentially just sending me kind of your thoughts on particular things? Because even as someone who studied history in college, university, and in a master's program, I regret that I learned about the importance of the Haitian Revolution way too late. And so I would like to try and for as many of those opportunities as we can, include those things in this iteration.
Yeah, I'm in the process of writing detailed comments on the standards again, but yes, happy to.
Thank you. So, I'd love to connect with you on that. And then, Ms. Childs, so both of the things that you kind of mentioned with regards to dual enrollment and financial literacy I've thought of recently. And so with regards to dual enrollment, what are your thoughts, particularly like how it should be expanded?
So BARD offers a sequence course where basically an adjunct professor can come and teach at the LEAs, the dual enrollment courses. And so to allow for course credit, I know BARD also has like folks that can help with credit transfers as well. And the sequence pays for books and the curriculum and the adjunct professor's salary as well. And I know the 2 LEAs that have that BARD sequence, they've had really great success, actually better than other places in the nation. So I think that that is something worthwhile that DC should expand.
Thanks. And then, it was concerning to hear that students don't get credit necessarily, and as we kind of revamp the report card and think about graduation requirements, that's something to keep in mind. With regards to the implementation of financial literacy, with my last question, one of the challenges of requiring or mandating financial literacy is that it doesn't necessarily count as a fourth math credit at certain four-year universities. So I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are on how we thoughtfully move forward with making financial literacy more accessible to DC students.
Well, I was actually hoping that we'd get the financial literacy as part of the social studies standards. I know 10 other states offer that, and so that's a way to make sure it counts.
Thank you. Representative Goulet.
Well, thank you all. I apologize for walking in late. I've had a work commitment that ran late today, but I was able to thankfully listen to all the testimony, on the way here, and I want to thank everybody for your testimony today. Ms. Giles, I want to talk about the dual enrollment. That is really something exciting. I would love to work with you more on that. I think it's a great opportunity for students across our city, and luckily, we've formed now an Education Standards Committee, which I'm on. I just would love that. With relation to the financial literacy, what grade levels would you see that being most beneficial, and how do you think it should be worked in? I mean, what would your recommendation be for how we fit it in without displacing other things?
Yeah, so I know that 8th grade becomes really important in high school. There's also some financial literacy you could do at younger grades. So I think it's an important tool for all of our students to have. I see it as a life skill.
And particularly, I'm thinking like when they start the summer youth employment program, maybe having it, intro to that, to talk about, you're going to be entering into this program, you're going to be making money for the first time, and we want to talk to you about financial literacy, and then having it at multiple grades, I think, as you suggested. I'm excited to work with you and see how we can incorporate it into the social studies standards. I think that's really exciting. And Mrs. Schwartz, it's good to see you again as well. We've gotten so many great emails from you and so many great testimonies. I just cannot wait to keep working with you these last couple months here. And I think we've made great strides. OSCE's incorporated a lot of what you said earlier. I've seen it reflected in the standards, so that's good. But I appreciate you sharing more things that we can do to make that even better. So just thank you so much for coming out tonight. I'll return the rest of my time to the board here, and just thank all the witnesses for coming out and speaking tonight. And it was great testimony from all of you.
Thank you. Vice President O'Leary.
So this is a public service announcement especially for the modified diploma, Ms. Svoboda, and for the financial literacy. You need to talk to your city council members, because those are the people that can make the changes with that. All right. Unfortunately, we're not the ones that can make the changes for that. And especially with the modified diploma, and I taught forever in high school, and we had a lot of students with IEPs. And I agree completely about that. I don't know how much that seems like a very easy fix, but it has to be voiced to the people that can make those changes. And sometimes it may not be the school system. It needs to come through the city council. And a special financial literacy. Now, I don't know how many of you took a course in financial literacy. I know I didn't. And I learned financial literacy by on-the-job training. And our students don't need to leave their schools to go and not know how to write a check or deposit money in a bank or do all these things that are second nature to adults, some adults. And I remember when I first came on the board and our student members were talking about, why don't we have a course in financial literacy? It's an elective course. It should be in the math genre, but that seems like an easy fix. But it unfortunately, it's not a decision that we can make on the State Board of Education. It's a decision that has to come through the other elected officials. So I think that Ms. Giles, that I'm charging you with getting the word out to those people.
I can certainly do that. I hope that financial literacy can be part of the social studies standards too.
But if not, then it's just as important to be a standalone kind of a course. I understand what you're saying about it, and I know that right now they sort of pushed aside financial literacy for the standards. But they're listening tonight, so thank you for bringing it up. Thank you all very much.
President Thompson.
Good evening. I want to thank the panel for their testimony. I have a couple comments and then I have one question. My comments. First, I'm actually going to disagree. That's not right, so I'm just going to keep talking. I'm going to disagree with my vice president a little bit. You, actually all of you, maybe not you so much, with the digital literacy are actually in the right place. So the board does have 16 statutory responsibilities. One of them has to do with standards. One of them has to do with graduation requirements. What we do not have the power to do is initiate those processes. I know, my sense of time has left me. It is in the pre-pandemic times. But one of the things that we passed in our board governance report is a recommendation for the council to look at the ability for us to initiate, so that when we hear from people over and over things like we should start the financial literacy standards review, or we should make changes to our high school graduation requirement because that is actually within our statutory responsibility, that we can say to OSSI, we're hearing this from the public, we would like to talk about doing that now. We cannot currently do that. So you're in the right place for the conversation. The question then becomes our negotiation with OSSI on the timeline and the importance of making those changes. So I don't want to tell you, like, yes, go talk to other people, make sure they know and understand, but I don't want you to think that you were misinformed when you came here tonight. So that's first. Second, as far as process, Sally, you said you feel like the process has been one way. And yelling into the wind a little bit, and you can't, and yelling into the wind a little bit, and you can't quite tell what's been considered. I'm curious to hear from you why you, either like, not so much why you feel that way, but like what could be different given we still have more standards that will come beyond this one. And so from a process standpoint, I want to better understand points of improvement.
I'm really referring to OSSI. OSSI created a portal for online comments once they release the standards. You submit your comments. There's no opportunity to engage, none whatsoever. There's no one that will answer the call. So, and I have written and said, you know, can we talk about it? Because there are a lot of experts that would come in and help if they were interested, but there's no response. So it's difficult to sort of argue for something and not really understand why why some changes are accepted and some changes are not. So it's really the OSSE is one way, and we can advocate, we can speak to you and have that exchange, but not to OSSE. So that's what I'm referring to. If you can change that, that would be great.
Okay, that's still helpful. Thank you.
Thank you all for your public testimony today. We will now call the next round of public witnesses. If you haven't already done so, please make sure we have a digital copy of your testimony so that we can put it online. Next up to the podium, we invite Nadia Roberts, Oliver Tinio, Molly Ellis, and Ebony Goddard. Is there anyone who had showed up earlier that showed up later that was missed? Okay. Well. Yeah.
Okay. So, good evening, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to come in and give my testimony. My name is Nadia Roberts. I am a member of Ward 4's community, beautiful community, and I'm also a parent with children in DCPS. And I'm also a parent who's concerned with the children in our community, period, all wards. Parents are not given enough information when it comes to special education early on in the process. It's not actual until it's an actual IEP meeting where a parent is given a packet, which is called safeguard procedural. You're given a sheet that sits in front of you, and you're asked for your signature to be placed there saying that you received a copy. Not in one IEP meeting have I been there, and they said, let's open this up, Ms. Roberts, to see if you actually understand your rights. I have an issue with that. At least once a year, all parents need to be given information about special education. If a parent has a student that's falling behind with no bench point, a parent should be notified, should have information that they have the right to reach out to the school and ask that their child be tested. With all the criminal activity that's going on within our communities, I strongly believe if things are put into place in our schools, such as supports, when it comes to behavioral plans and things of this nature, children are embarrassed. Children are avoiding school. They're avoiding class. They're ending up in the community. So if we can put these things in place, I strongly believe that the criminal activity will be reduced. We are losing our children to the streets, ending up in the criminal justice system, and more sadly, to death. This has to stop. There are a slew of special education attorneys willing to help parents in DC. But guess what? They don't even know their rights. Yes, it's on the websites at the school, but if you don't even know what special education is or what you're looking for, how can you find these things? How can you navigate this? You simply can't. So I'm just asking you. I can't say it would be 100%, but let's just try. Because we all saying we care about our children. Let's try. Thank you. Thank you for your time. And I'm open. If the board is interested in me forwarding you my testimony, I will. But all of this is coming from the heart. Thank you for having me here today. I will not stop. I'm going to continue advocating. And yes, I plan to advocate in front of the city council.
Well, let us ask
Thank you.
Let us ask you some questions, because it's all around's going to be for you. Okay.
Yes, because I'm ready.
Representative Bernstadt.
Thank you so much for your time and your testimony. I obviously completely agree with everything you said. I just had a question about, oh, I accidentally opened something. I'm looking at my notes. You mentioned, obviously, that resources should be more accessible and, like, students should know that they can test their children. Do you think that, like, once parents are aware of this testing, that process is easy? Like, what are some challenges that arise in the actual process of, like, yes, it's important for parents to know that they can get their children tested through the school, but, like, do you think that actual process of testing is easy, or, like, what can be done to smooth it over? And I know my time didn't
It's
start.
school's obligation to locate, identify, and make sure. It's really not even the parents. Because some parents, like again I said, don't even know what special education is. But it's the obligation of the school. It's just not being enforced. So if we can enforce that and put more restrictive, things in place so that IEPs could be getting implemented and things of this nature, I strongly agree it'll be a better outcome. We got to do something.
Okay. Thank you so much. That's my question.
Representative Henderson.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for your testimony and for highlighting places we very much need to improve. I know there are some efforts, like we have a special education hub, but what I'm hearing from you is how important it is for information to come to parents at the school level. This is not a got you question, but just out of curiosity, are you aware of the special education hub that TC has?
I am very aware.
Okay.
Again, yes, I am very aware. Again, I feel as though parents are not given the maximum information. If there is merit, a parent can retain an attorney and make sure things are done in school. I have a success story, but it didn't become successful until I retained an attorney. My student right here in DC was in elementary when I retained that attorney, and he's a success story. He graduated from Eastern Senior High School with a high school diploma. So I know it could be done, and I did it for mine, but I want it done for every youth in DC.
Yeah, thank you, and I agree. It shouldn't have to take an attorney to get those results. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Reed.
All right, now, Ms. Roberts, you came in, was that the time before, I think, public meeting before, you were nervous, your palms were sweating, you read each card verbatim, and now you are just very much comfortable, so keep coming back, keep advocating. I think that your comments definitely resonate with me, because I remember doing the exact same thing. Like, this is why this is important, because you get to reflect on the things that you did, and you're like, ooh, could have did that better. Because of some of the timeline issues with, you do give the packet. It's about 40 pages, and that, like you're saying, I don't know, we gave it, they signed it. Did it ever get read? We don't know, and we could have did some more due diligence. And I'm glad Representative Henderson mentioned the special education hub, thinking about how do we build in time before the clock starts ticking, so that you're not up against the paperwork piece of it, but also making sure the family totally understands what they're actually signing up for. Okay, enough of my rambling about that. I am curious about, you mentioned your son graduated a diploma, and I'm thinking about Ms. Zavoba's testimony. Sorry, Ms. Zavoba. What was that pathway like? Did it start with they were trying to do certificate of completion, and then how did you switch over to the completion of diploma?
I can remember when it was being discussed, and I was asking for more time. Like, I still have a high school beginning student. I was asking for more time because not every student knows their path, whether they wanted to go to college, whether they want to go, to trade school. So I would say asking in elementary that's too early, If they could put it in place, I would say middle school, because we definitely have to do improvements when it comes to transitioning from middle school into high school. That's one of the issues too.
So your son was on the certificate of completion until about how long? Until about what grade?
This was going into high school.
Into high school,
Yes.
okay. So I'm guessing they had to do some course correction. Like, how did they? Because you're kind of at that
'Cause you
rate,
have
you're
to
behind,
monitor
not behind in
how the-
skill, but behind in coursework. So what did you
Exactly.
do
'Cause
from there?
Of course, like she's saying, when it comes to getting jobs and things of that nature, you know, they're not going to have experience just leaving school. You know, you can't present a certificate on a job. So it must be in place, and they need it now. So I'll be right with her when she goes to the city council.
We will be leaning on you. Thank you.
Representative Williams.
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Roberts, for your testimony and your passion in identifying some of the gaps that we have in the city around enforcement. And, you know, it's bothersome that parents feel, and not just yourself, because I've heard this from other parents, like that an attorney is necessary to be able to get students with special needs the education that they have a right to, right? It shouldn't be something that's extra. It's a right to an education that should be required and prioritized. And I guess I'm just curious, in your experience, in terms of enforcing, you know, the education that students with special needs deserve, what have you found to be successful outside of just, you know, obtaining an attorney? You know, because I feel like once we get to that place, like, we're already at an extreme place, right? Like, we need to make this part of the culture change that needs to happen.
As a parent or guardian, the first and strongest advocate is going to be that parent. You know what I'm saying? It took me to find that attorney, you know, but not all parents. Some parents have disabilities themselves. So even putting people in place to help these parents.
Right. And I know, too, for my time teaching 6th and 7th grade, just like from a school that really took education seriously, you know, that also putting students in the driver's seat of being able to advocate and know when they're not getting something, you know, then makes the family partnership much stronger, right? Because if you're then having to ask something that they might not know, it's hard to be able to get the clarity that you need to get them the services and instruction they deserve. So I think even just having more systems that we make sure that middle schoolers know what their needs are, and then training them to be their own advocates, can be really powerful moving forward.
And then that's why I'm asking for more information for the parents, because if the parents are not being told, or the parents are not getting the information, how can they pass it to the students?
Yeah, thank you.
Representative Goulet.
Ms. Roberts, I want to thank you for coming in again. And great testimony and very powerful. And I think you here in the nation's capital, we're losing a quarter of our kids to dropout. I mean, you spelled it out as to what the difference between your child's experience was versus the kids we're losing, many of which you probably have special education needs that go undiagnosed. I mean, it was a parent who would do anything to make sure their child succeeded. You got the attorney, you held the system accountable, and that was the difference right there. And it shouldn't have to be that. I mean, it's amazing what you did, but we need advocates for the kids in the schools. And if it's not a parent, because some parents, may not have the resources, they may not have the love and desire you did to help their kid. But it makes me think about maybe that we need advocates within the schools who can assess the kids and work with the kids even in absence of that parental involvement, because a lot of these children, unfortunately, don't have a mom who is willing to step up and do what you did. So it gives me a lot to think about. I really appreciate you coming and sharing it. And, we are, the State Board, of Education Standards. So I think it gives us something to think about as to how, we do our work through the Ombudsman's office, and how we think about just advocacy for students, if not necessarily the parents being able to do it, but somebody within the school who looks out for that kid, identifies what they need to graduate. And then you talked about, losing kids to the streets also, which occurs after school hours. I mean, I know we've really talked a lot about this last year about the need to expand out of school time programming, but I think that would be something really a key to give every kid that spark between maybe 3:30 and the time the parent can get off work and pick them up at 6 o'clock. Something to just either, if it's a kid with special needs that they feel a passion for, something that'll connect them and keep them in school. So you've given us so much to think about. Thanks for coming in and sharing your story again with us, and just really grateful you decided to join us again here, and keep talking to the council too. I think that's a good way to share your experience, and hopefully we'll get something done on this to make a difference. So thank you.
Vice President O'Leary.
Identification is key. Students need to be identified, and it's the school's responsibility to identify those students, right? When you're a very active parent, all right, an advocate. There are a lot of parents, especially in Ward 4, who are from other countries, who don't speak English, who don't even have a concept of what an IEP is or a 504 is. And that's the system's responsibility. I think that, having this out wherever it is on the television or on the computer or whatever, the system needs to understand that the identification of a student shouldn't take a month or 2 months for a parent to be notified that the student needs to be tested. I remember that there were a lot of parents who didn't want their child tested because it would label them as special education, right? I've never looked at the concept of special education as a negative concept. It's a special education, all right? And there are thousands and thousands of students in DC who aren't identified with my daughter had a 504 because she's ADD, all right? But that's not like a pretty special education thing. Right. And there are a lot of students that need to be identified. So you've got to, I appreciate your testimony every time, but we need to keep, fighting the fight to make the system understand it.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
President Thompson.
So maybe it's not on accident, or maybe it's serendipity that you ended up being our final witness, and everyone got to ask you questions because you shared your story. And stories matter. There's a quote that's like, stories have been used to dispossess and to malign, but stories can also be used to empower and to humanize. It goes on, but I want to thank you for sharing your story with us. I'm curious if there are parts of your story that would be helpful to other people when you say, like, I found out and got an attorney in elementary, like, where are the places that you went for information that might be helpful for other parents, teachers, families to know?
I would gladly refer them. I would take them to the door. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. And so I just want to double check again if there's anyone else that we called earlier that has shown up to testify. Okay, President Thompson, I turn the meeting back over to you.
Okay. I do want to, again, thank all of our public witnesses for their comments tonight. We sincerely appreciate your testimony. I want to remind members of the public that we did have some people show up and talk about social studies, but you are welcome to come before us and raise any education issues. We welcome your comments, your feedback, your stories. We take it very much seriously. I do want to ask members if there are any announcements before we adjourn tonight that might be helpful for the public. Representative Bernstead.
Hi. So me and Representative Chang and a few other people are working on hosting a Pride Prom for LGBTQ students across the district and in like Montgomery County and Nova, really the DMV area. And I just wanted to say that again here in case anyone is listening who might be interested in volunteering or might know students who are interested in attending. It's completely free. We're also giving away free binders with information about how to size them, and we'll supply prom outfits for anyone who needs them. And we have many different options. There will be a lot of gender-affirming things there. It's May 13th. There's information up on social media. But if you have any questions, you can also email me. It's leavebernstadt@dc.gov. And it's going to be a super cool, super free event, whom anyone is welcome to join.
Representative Bernstadt has been accepted at Harvard.
That's the announcement for the public good. Feel free to applaud. Other announcements? Any other announcements from members? So hopefully this makes it a bit easier for families. This Saturday is Enrollment Saturday for DCPS. So if you are someone who works Monday through Friday and cannot get to a school during school hours to enroll your child, you can go to pretty much all of the DCPS schools. Most of them have hours between 9 and 12 this coming Saturday. Please go to the website for the hours for the specific school you are trying to enroll your child in. So no Enrollment Saturday across the district for DCPS. Hopefully that's helpful, Saturday hours. Okay, seeing no other announcements, I am going to thank members for your time and engagement tonight. As a reminder to our viewing public, the State Board will continue to hold its meetings in person, and we will convene at our May 12th working session and May 17th public meeting. I want to note that the May 10th working session is actually a different date from our regularly scheduled working session because of the OSCE Awards on May 3rd, and we want to be there to congratulate educators. With no further business before the State Board, I would now entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right, is there a second? Second. It has been properly moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I didn't think there would be. It sounds like those in favor have it, and this public meeting of the DC State Board of Education is adjourned at 7:49 p.m., which is a record for this board. Have a good night.